Hello there, and welcome to the English Language Club. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, whatever it is, wherever you are. I am Colin Munro, and this is my good friend Tony Culper. So
It's good to be here.
we are here just to hang out with you guys for the next hour or so, and to answer any questions you have about English and about learning English. See, we've got 13 people watching already, which is great. We've got Lolly Lolly, as always. Gaspar is here.
So Santa and Amer, number one, Balbal.
Great.
That's not 13 people. So if you're lurking in the video and say hello in the chat, let us know where you're from. We're always excited to have new people.
Yeah, or give us a thumbs up, or give us a thumbs up. It's always good to get those. So now we have a bit of a confession to make. Last week we had to cut it a bit short, and there were quite a few questions that we didn't get to, and we said we would get to them this week. But for some reason, YouTube is not allowing us to see those comments now, for some reason. So if you were one of those people who didn't get your question answered last week, then please type it in again now, just to remind us what it was. I think, Tony, though, you said there was one that you remembered?
There were a couple that are a little more complicated. I can't remember the exactly how they went, but one I do remember was someone asked the difference between the past perfect and the past perfect continuous. So, like, I had eaten versus I had been eating. Yeah.
So, in terms of the meaning,
So they both refer to something. So you're talking about a situation in the past, and because they're both perfect, that means they're talking about something that has actually happened further
yes,
in the past. It's finished. So in that past time you're talking about, say you're telling a story or you're talking about something you did yesterday or whatever, in that time, those actions were already finished, which means they had already affected that past time you're talking about. So for instance, you could say, so in the past, I was hungry because I had not eaten breakfast, right? So that's in the past, it's the perfect, and so it's something that says I was, and I was already hungry at that time because I had not eaten even earlier than that, right?
Yeah, so...
Did you want to add something?
Yeah, no, I was just going to say, maybe let's go back and say, so there's two elements to every tense. There's the time of action, which is the time you're talking about, and then there's the type of action. So the time of action would be past, present, or future. You can be more specific, obviously, by specifying, but in general, the different tenses are either past, present, or future. And then the type of action is either simple, continuous, or perfect. So these are both perfect tenses, which means that something has happened, something finished before the time you're talking about that has an effect on, and what you're actually talking about is the effect on the moment that you're talking about.
Yes.
But how does that work then with continuous?
So one of the things that we, just to go back to what you were talking about, this big idea that there's actually two parts to tense. If you look in some textbooks, you might call it tense and aspect, or time and aspect, or different names for it. So we, rather than getting caught up in the names, we want to call it the time of action and the type of action. So if the time of action is past, present, and future, it's important to realize that that's the time you're talking about, not necessarily the time the action happened. So if I say, yesterday I was hungry, that yesterday in the past is when I'm talking about. But I say I was hungry because I had not eaten the day before. See, that's happening even earlier, and that's why we use a perfect for it. So the other thing, though, thinking about the type of action, is something can be perfect or continuous or both or neither. If it's not perfect or continuous, then it's simple.
Yeah.
If it's perfect, that means it's already finished. If it's continuous, that means it's ongoing. And it can be both, perfect and continuous. So, for instance, an example of the past perfect continuous is I was tired, so we're talking about in the past, because I had been running for 3 hours.
Yeah.
right?
So it's not. So
that
that's a bit
running,
different. It's not that when you say it's perfect, that something can be perfect and continuous. Obviously, it can't be in progress and finished at the same time, but it can be.
So this is important to understand about the perfect. For instance, I could say, I have lived in Canada for however many years, but I'm not done living in Canada. When you use the perfect tense, that means you're talking about the action being finished or complete.
Yeah.
That doesn't mean that there's not more of it, but you're talking about the part that is finished.
Yeah.
So for instance, if you say I have run halfway, that verb, you're talking about the part you've done. You're not talking about what's in the future. And so that's interesting about the perfect, is it doesn't necessarily have to say the action is done. It means you're talking about the completed part, the finished part. So if you say I had been running for 4 hours, it's talking about in that further past, because it's perfect, in that further past time. So say yesterday I was tired because I had been running for 4 hours. So further back, that action of running was continuous.
Yeah.
And it doesn't actually say whether you have stopped running yet or not. You could be about to run for another 4 hours, because the perfect tense just means you're talking about the part that's finished. Like to say, I've lived in New York for 10 years, or I have been alive for however many years, right? Yeah. It's an interesting one, the perfect, yeah.
Yeah, so you're emphasizing the
other thing I wanted to
state at that time of action.
Yes.
And you're not really talking about what happened after or anything like that.
Right. The other thing that I think is important about the past, and we have got a question from number 1. Sir, please give us the general idea of the past tenses. Why is this tense being used so much in novels or stories? So maybe we can get to that specific question, but in order. But I want to answer sort of part of it, which is that we have one main past tense, the past simple. I was, I did, and that's the main tense that we use. But then usually when we want to talk about something that happened around the time we're talking about, either before or after or whatever. Am I doing that bouncing back and forth thing?
Yeah, we lost you a little bit there. Hopefully, let me fix that. But there you go. You see, you jump back again. I don't know why it does this sometimes.
I'll keep talking. So usually you'll wind up with the main story that you're telling is in just the simple past, and then you'll use past perfect for things that had happened even earlier than what you're telling about, or you use the past continuous for things that are happening kind of in the background. So you could say, I was hungry because I had not eaten breakfast, so I went into the kitchen where my mother was cooking, right? So you're telling the story, I was hungry, I went into the kitchen, in past simple. Then for any information that had already happened earlier in your story, you use the past perfect. I was hungry because I had not eaten. And things that are happening in the background at the same time, you use the past continuous. I went into the kitchen where my mother was cooking, right? So hopefully that helps kind of see how all those past tenses fit together.
Yeah. Yeah, so and there's also a group of tenses which are often referred to collectively as the narrative tenses, because they are used a lot when we tell stories. So this sort of ties in with number 1's question as well. And I think
that is the answer, basically, that the past tenses are generally used to tell a story. Even if that story is not set in the past, when we're telling a story, we almost always we talk about it as if it's in the past. Because if you're telling a real story, it's always it happened in the past. So when you're telling a fictitious story, like in a novel, we are just used to telling the story in past tense. And so that's the way people write novels. Not all the time, but a lot of the time. We use these narrative tenses. Yeah.
Make sure you stay tuned and make sure you follow us and subscribe, because very soon, as you regulars know, we've been working on a big grammar course focusing on tenses. Our goal has been to really make tense make sense. because a lot of people find it difficult, tenses and things, and we think we've found a few key ideas that will really help to make things make sense.
Yes.
And the course is almost ready now, and within 2 or 3 weeks we will be doing a kind of launch event where we're basically going to go through the whole course in a live stream. So like we've said in the past, we're not really trying to. Our main goal is to create free materials. So although the course will be sort of paid for, we're not trying to hold anything back in the live streams or in the videos. So we are going to basically give away everything for free in that live stream. But hopefully, if you like it and you want to support us and you want a bit more, you can go to our website and do the course. But if you do that, then you will also get exercises that you can do on the website and things like that. And it will be broken down into more manageable chunks, and it will be structured in a more orderly way than just watching videos on YouTube. So yes, if you are interested in tenses and things, make sure you stay tuned, join the mailing list, subscribe, click the like button, hit the bell icon, all that stuff. Great. Shall we move on to another question?
So let's go back up to the top and actually start our questions in chronological order. So Santa has 3 questions for us.
Great.
The first is, we blank to the cinema twice this month. Should I say were or have been to the cinema?
Well, you can say either have been or went.
Yes. So we don't say were for like a static, simple action that you just do. You could say went though. Yeah, exactly. And either of those would be fine, right? I went to the cinema twice this month, or I have been to the cinema twice this month.
But so if it was say, let's say it's today. Maybe you're planning to go to the cinema tomorrow.
Yes.
But you've already been twice. You went last week and the week before, and they were both in October as well. So then it would be appropriate to use the present. What is it?
The perfect.
Yeah, the present perfect.
The present perfect.
Because it's I have been. Because you're only talking about the 2 weeks or whatever that has finished. So it ties in with what we were saying earlier.
Yes.
So you're only talking about that. If you said I went to the cinema twice this month, then there's an implication that you're not going to go again. That in October you went twice.
So you might say, I went to the cinema twice this month, so I'm not going anymore.
Yeah.
Or you would say, I have been to the cinema twice this month, but I'm going again next week.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah. That's a really good example, actually, of what we were talking about, that the perfect means that you're talking about the part that's finished, even if something is ongoing or even if something is not over or will continue in the future. Yeah, that's a really, really interesting one.
Yeah, so have been or went are both grammatically correct, but with slightly different meanings. Yeah. So then her next question is could have had to do something a valid structure? Yes. It's one of the more. This is about as complicated as grammar and auxiliary. Sorry, not grammar, but tenses and auxiliary verbs get, isn't it? Because we've got 2 auxiliary verbs there for tense, and they're both have. There's only one there.
There's one modal, one it's the past or the present perfect of have. Yeah. Right? Have to.
Yeah. So that's why we got that verb have twice, because have is the main verb.
And then you have an infinitive, have to do something. Yeah. Right? So the phrase had to do is very common. Had to do something, or had to, and then it doesn't have to be the word do. And so anytime you could see this in lots of situations, like if I didn't go to university, I could have had to work much harder to get where I am today, as an example.
Now, I think we need to talk more about could, though. What is could doing in this sentence? Because that's a modal verb, which is a type of auxiliary verb in this sentence.
Yes.
And could is technically the past tense form of can. And can is a very strange verb.
Yes, it is.
It doesn't have really an infinitive form. You can't say to can, but you can say to be able to.
Yes.
So what is could doing in this sentence?
So it really depends on the situation. In the example I gave, could is making it it's talking about the past, and it's a hypothetical in the past. I could have. In fact, that you see that a lot. Could have means it's in the past, but it's something that isn't real. It's a hypothetical. So I could have been an astronaut if I had worked hard at it from the time I was 2. That kind of thing. You use this. That's mainly what it's for, to talk about something that is an alternative possibility for the past that didn't actually happen.
Yes. Great. Hopefully that's helpful, Susanna. Let us know in the comments. We've got one more comment from you so far. What are involuntary, celibate, and self-absolving ideas? I've no idea what this is.
So
I think
I can tell. I can tell that these are coming from the news, because these are both phrases that have turned up in the news a lot recently. A celibate is, of course, someone who chooses to go without a partner. Or normally, that's what it means, is someone who goes without a partner. I think in some languages, the word celibate just means single, like they don't have a partner. So involuntary celibate means that you didn't choose it; it was forced on you.
Right.
And nowadays, this is used as a derogatory term towards people who are perceived as not being able to get a partner. They can't get a boyfriend or a girlfriend. And it's a very derogatory term that, for whatever reason, has become somewhat mainstream. In fact, there's an abbreviation, which incel is the abbreviation for that. And again, it's a very derogatory term.
It's weird because it shouldn't. It's not. There's nothing inherently derogatory about it. It's just
exactly. And just like most words that become insults, the word itself is not necessarily insulting. It has just been used as an insult, and that creates history, right?
Yeah. I suppose that insulting connotation often comes later.
Exactly.
With a lot of words.
Yes.
That's the case.
And that's, I think that's something that is important to understand when you're learning English or learning any language, is you can't necessarily tell which words are going to be the dirty words based on just what they mean. Some perfectly innocuous words might actually be really dirty in context, just because they have been used as insults in the past. The other one, a self-absolving idea, is, again, it's used as an insult, but the idea is perfectly it's a perfectly legitimate idea. A self-absolving idea is if you have a belief or an argument that just so happens to make your beliefs, to validate your beliefs, or to make what you do okay. So, for instance, if you don't believe in working out, and then you come up with an explanation for why not working out is okay and is actually healthier, then that's called a self-absolving idea.
Lots of people get injured working out. So that's
that's
an example.
That would be an example of self-absolving idea, or where and this happens a lot for political groups or religious groups, where people will come up with complicated reasons why what they do is okay, even if sometimes there's things that are obviously not. If there's political violence going on, sometimes members of that group will come up with complicated reasons why it's okay. And it's a self-absolving idea. Now, not all self-absolving ideas are bad, but that's mostly what you're hearing talked about in the news. The word absolve just means to kind of forgive, to make it okay. Mm-hmm. It's not a very common word, absolving, outside of like theology and stuff like that. So you can always tell Susanta's watching the news, practicing their English.
which is
That's great.
great.
And I
Yes.
certainly enjoy answering these questions because some of them are a little bit obscure,
Yeah.
not nor things I normally get asked.
And one of the questions we often get is, how can I improve my vocabulary and things like that? And what Susanta's doing there is a really great way, especially with coming to us with some of the questions that she doesn't quite understand. So yeah, great.
Definitely. Yeah. I
So
mean, I that's a great pattern. I like the idea of being out there reading, listening, and then asking
mm,
someone who knows what are these. I'm imagining Susanta with a notebook that they're jotting down things down as they watch, and maybe you just have a good memory and you remember them. Maybe you copy and paste it from news stories that you're reading or whatever. But
yeah,
being able to find someone that you can ask to clarify is excellent. And so I'm kudos to all of you who are here asking us questions because that's what we're here to do.
yep. And I hope that we can do more of that in the future.
Sure.
So moving on, we've got a question from Bao. Hello, people. How native speakers recognise speedy sounds by ear or experience? So, that's a good question.
I think the important point here is that those are not different things. Recognizing something by ear means that you have enough experience to be able to understand it or pick it out without really thinking about it.
Yeah, but I think
So
what they mean is, but do you just hear it, or is it through interpreting it based on your experience?
exactly,
Yeah,
and that's like, well, so, and again, like, do you have to think about it or kind of place what it means? And that's definitely a lot of there's actually kind of two halves to this as well because your brain does this naturally. If your brain hears, and this is in any language, if your brain hears a sound that's too quick for it to actually make out, it will automatically tell you. This isn't something you have a choice over. Your brain will just feed you whatever it thinks the sound should have been. And this happens for not just language, but it's most. This is why you might hear a creak or something in your house and think, oh, it's not just like, oh, I thought maybe that sounded like, but your brain just tells you, oh, that was someone talking, or that was a footstep, or that was a snarling monster, or whatever. It's literally just because your brain didn't have enough information to actually know what was happening, but it didn't tell you, oh, I'm not sure about this. It just fed you its own interpretation as if that was really happening. So you have to kind of be careful about this because oftentimes your brain will just kind of fill in a short sound like an or the or a prefix. Oftentimes your brain will just feed you what it thought it heard, and that could be correct or it could be incorrect, and that's where you get a lot of misinformation or misunderstandings.
yeah,
Uh,
yeah. So going back to the question, then, how do we recognise speedy sounds? I guess it is mostly experience. There's only certain ways that people string certain sounds together, and and I guess those sounds become one. And I mean, the common examples are things like I'm gonna go now, and we know that means going to, or wanna, that means I want to, I wanna. So those are things that we know from experience. That's what those words mean.
Yeah. Another one I'm fond of because it always trips me up is the difference between mm-hmm, which means yes, and mm-mm, which means no. Um, yeah, and so people sometimes say them so quickly that
Yeah.
you're not really. They annoy me
But that
because
must be not
it's
unique to English, though.
no, of course not. And I don't think any of this is unique to
Yeah.
English. I don't think this question has anything to do with English. It's just about how do people recognize
Language acquisition in
language
general.
in their own. And so, Balbal, just think about your own language,
Mm.
the quick, short sounds, or the sounds that might make a difference between two words. How do you recognize it? Do you pause and think, okay, did they have a rising intonation or a falling intonation on that word, or on that syllable, and therefore did it mean this or this? No, like the more experience you have, the more it becomes by ear. right? And so for a native speaker, it's going to, for most cases, it's going to seem like it's by ear because they're just interpreting it instantly. But really, that is by experience. That it's just their brain has gone through the process of figuring out, okay, say they said this, therefore I think they said this. So many times, it's just become instantaneous. And that really is a lot of the way you become kind of a native speaker, or your English level or any level in any language becomes native, is not because you've worked really hard at a lot of rules, but because your experience has gotten so vast that you're beginning to make these judgments instantaneously without having to pause to think about it. Yeah.
Great. Well, we've got a few more people watching now, so if you have just tuned in, get your questions coming in because we're here to answer your questions, and there's not many left. We have got one from Alexander, which I think we'll do now, and yeah, number one, I think we already answered that mostly. But yes, if you have just joined us, thank you for watching, and yeah, get your questions coming in. So. Should we go to, so number one, I think we already answered this question about the past tenses, so we don't need to say more about that.
The narrative tenses.
Unless you've got any follow-up question, number one, let us know.
Absolutely.
And then Alexander says, where do native speakers pick their large vocabulary? Thank you for answering. Well, we already talked about how Susanta uses the news. And she's actually clarified that. She says yes, she gets it from the news, or she uses news as a way of improving her vocabulary. So where do native speakers get their large vocabulary?
So I think there might be two questions in this. One, because all native speakers have a very large vocabulary in English compared to someone who's learning. But then we think of people who have large vocabularies as having even above and beyond the typical native speaker.
Yeah. I think your vocabulary is probably much larger than mine.
Well, it's larger than some people's. I don't know. Yours is pretty good yourself, so I don't know if it's a good comparison. But still, people who have very large vocabularies share some common habits, right? They read a lot. They follow news stories, not just necessarily everyday things, but when they see an article about something interesting, they'll read it, even if it's not maybe the thing that they are interested in. It's something interesting, and so they're constantly expanding the things that they're looking at, the things they're reading, the words they're exposed to. And so they get a large vocabulary. So this is, generally speaking, this is the key to having a large vocabulary in any language, is constantly reading or listening to new things and not limiting yourself to just one thing. A lot of people, for instance, you might be an engineer and you know thousands of words about material density and striations and all this stuff that you're never going to use in your everyday vocabulary, your everyday language, but you just know a lot of those technical terms. But if you are an engineer who likes to read about art history, and you also like to read about space exploration, and you like to read about history, then you're going to start picking up tons of vocabulary that you can use when you're not talking to just other engineers.
Yeah. Right. So having a wide range of interests is one way. Now, if you're asking this because you want to improve your vocabulary, I think that's a very different question, because in a way, Alexander, your question, it's like nothing to do with English. I mean, how do people? I don't know what your native language is, Alexander, but how do native speakers in your language pick up a large vocabulary? And the answer's the same for English and any language. But if your question is how do people who are speaking or learning English as a second or third language or fourth language or whatever, how can they improve their vocabulary? Then, like doing like what Susanta does with the news, and when she hears vocabulary she hasn't heard before, she makes a note of it and looks it up, or asks us or other people that she knows. But then not just, you could do that with not just the news. I think what Tony you're getting at is saying a wide range of things that interest you, whether that. So I think podcasts would be a really great way.
Podcast, yeah.
I listen to a few podcasts about various things that interest me, things like science and investing, two very very different subjects that don't really overlap very much, but they are things that I'm interested in. So you gotta stick to what you're interested in, otherwise things get boring.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. And especially if you are not a native speaker, but you really want to improve your vocabulary in that language, the more native speakers that you are listening to, the better your vocabulary is going to be, because you're going to, like, for instance, if you only listen to people who are from the same place, like you only listen to podcasts out of London. Now, London's not a good example because there's lots of different.
Yeah.
It's very multicultural, but so a better example might be Texas. Though Texas is much more multicultural than the stereotype indicates now. But if you're only listening to people from one geographical location, you'll only hear their set of their dialect, so to speak, the words that they use commonly. Or if you only listen to people that have one area of expertise, like language, then you're going to hear those vocabulary terms. But if you listen to people from different parts of the world and podcasts, for instance, on different topics, like some podcasts on how to learn English, but also, let's say, you're interested in European history, so you listen to podcasts in English about European history. Again, the more broadly you listen, the more different people you listen to, the better your vocabulary is going to be.
Yeah.
I do
and
want
that's
to kind of address...
that kind of ties in with what Balbal's question from earlier about speedy sounds. How do native speakers recognize speedy sounds? So, listening to native speakers and getting, so the answer's the same. Listening to podcasts and news and things are going to be a really good way to do that. I think podcasts may be even better, because in podcasts you're going to get people speaking a lot more naturally, whereas on the news, if you're watching BBC News, they do try to keep that language relatively simple, and everyone speaks in a certain way with a certain level of clarity, unless it's like someone being interviewed or something. But on podcasts you're going to get a wider range of people and speaking more naturally, I think. So. Yeah.
Yes, and again, this is a situation where YouTube is maybe even better, because you can see their lips. Normally, you can't see my lips too super well, but and so you can sometimes learn how to pick up the physical cues for how they're pronouncing their words. I do want to address the kind of the question as asked, like, where do native speakers get their large vocabulary? Because last week we were talking about the fact that any native speaker, even someone who does not have a particularly large vocabulary, has a vocabulary that's so big that it would take decades for a non-native speaker to learn that many words. And that's because, like, as a native speaker, even as a child, you'll learn, bouncy and springy, and so many different variations on the same thing. You'll learn, tired, exhausted, worn down, worn out, and so on. So English has so much variety because of the way its history works, that it doesn't get rid of words, it just takes new ones all the time. So you'll have 6 or 8 words that mean almost the same thing. And so as a native speaker, you just learn a lot of these secondary words. People don't necessarily use them all, but they've heard them. So as a non-native speaker, on the one hand, you don't have to worry about learning as many words as a native speaker knows, because most of them are not words you're going to use very often. But the other side of that is knowing the words isn't really enough to give you kind of a native speaker vocabulary. Using the words in the proper place, like, even though they might mean the same thing, sometimes we use this word even though it means the same as this other word, but we don't use that in that situation. Like, again, we talked about beneath or under, just kind of knowing the collocations is kind of the trick. Did I disappear? Feel like I disappeared.
You didn't disappear, but you did that thing where you jumped up to the side of the screen, and I was going to fix it, but whenever I try and fix it, it always goes wrong again. So I'm just going to leave it, and it will fix itself. So yeah,
okay.
We are going to experiment with another system for future live streams. So this kind of thing hopefully won't be an issue in the future. Yeah. Okay. So let's see. We've got any other questions? We've got quite a lot of people watching now. So if you have just joined us again, get your questions coming in. We're here to help you. And if you are finding this helpful so far, give us a thumbs up. That sort of really does help us as well, and it helps other people find us. And I think it will help you find us in the future, because YouTube will be more likely to alert you when we're going live and when we put new videos up and things like that. So yeah, give us a thumbs up. We've got 12 so far. Hopefully we can get to 25 by the end of the stream. Okay.
So we still have a couple of questions.
Yeah, it was a good one here from Thang Trong. Hello, sir. I have a question. Why is Batman one word, and Iron Man 2 words, and Spider-Man 2 words with a dash? Can you explain this?
What an exciting question.
Yes. I think we may have skipped over some questions there, but that one just jumped out at me. We will get back to you. Yes, if you asked the question before that, we'll get back to that. Yeah. So why is that, Tony?
There's long answer to this and there's a short answer to this. The short answer is because those are made up words, and so the people who made them picked what looked best. Because these are words that originally showed up a long time ago on a as the headline of a comic book that was going to be on sale, not on the internet but on a stand somewhere. And so they
these
wanted
words
it to
were
catchy.
the actual title of the publication, and yeah.
In some cases, yeah. So, for instance, Batman showed up in a comic that was called Detective Comics, which is where you get the term DC from. It was from the name of the comic was originally Detective Comics, and DC. So that one was just he was a character in that. His name wasn't the headline. Whereas for like Iron Man, it was. Right, and so now we're getting into kind of the longer. It has to do with the era they came from, like what time, and whether they had their own comic or whether they were a visitor on another comic. But generally speaking, all three of these are examples of compound words in English where you can just smash words together. Now, man happens to be a really common one, but the thing about these compound words is that there is not a hard rule for how they're going to be spelled. Some of them are going to be mushed into one word. Usually what happens is if something is really, really common, or it doesn't make sense as a phrase, then you smush them together. An example would be housefly. If you used housefly as two different words, everyone would look at it and be like, well, is it a house flying, or is it a house kind of fly? And so they smash it together to just the word housefly, so that there's no confusion.
Yeah.
But the reality is there isn't necessarily a rule that anyone has to follow. If you make up let's say you're a science fiction author and you're making up a new piece of technology and you're going to call it a brain laser, whatever. You can choose. Do you call it a brain laser, or do you call it a brain laser, or do you hyphenate it, brain laser? Now, with hyphens, there are some very specific rules that you follow. Usually, you hyphenate something if it could stand on its own as a phrase, but you don't want it to. In this case, you want to show that they're connected.
You want to join them, yeah.
Yeah. But again, that's not why Spider-Man sometimes has a dash in it. It's just because when they came up with the name, they liked it with a dash in it. Yeah.
Yeah. So
that's really cool.
But if the words were the other way around and it was man spider, then we would think you're talking about a the other, because it comes down to the structure of use of adjective being before the noun.
Right.
And even though spider is not an adjective, it's sort of being used. It's being used to describe the man, and we just sort of, our brains just know that because we're used to that English structure. But that is different in other languages. So if you said,
right,
yeah, and I do think they do when they translate those comics to other languages, they do switch it the other way around sometimes, or sometimes they may just use the name as the English
I've seen
name.
both.
Yeah.
Sometimes where they will, and that I think also just has to do with it just whatever the first translator that where it got big did, and it's just kind of been stuck that way because again there are some rules for translating, but they don't always get followed.
Now I'm going to do a bit of a shameless plug here for another one of my projects from the past, which actually Tony was briefly. You collaborated with me on it. I used to do a podcast with a friend of mine called Ross Lawhead. It's called Fiction Hack, and it's all about kind of stories and TV. We basically talked about TV shows and movies and comic books and things like that. And we sort of analysed. We talked about why they were good and which ones were good and which, not like reviewing, but we sort of analysed what makes a good story, because he's a genius. My friend Ross, he's a really good writer, and he really knows what he's talking about when it comes to writing and storytelling. So I kind of just sat there and just asked him questions, but he's the one that did most of the talking. I was kind of the host, kind of like I am now, kind of like the part I play now with Tony. I let Tony.
You're a really good host.
So. Oh, thank you. So yeah, if you are interested in comic books or you're interested to see more of what I've done, then check out. If you search for Fiction Hack as a podcast, you'll be able to. You should find it. I hope. I'll write that in the chat for you. Fiction Hack. And Tony was in. Tony featured in one of the episodes because you've done a lot of writing as well. You're also a very good writer, so we had you on to talk about. I think it was during NaNoWriMo, which is National Novel Writing Month. I was going to say week, but that doesn't make sense. Yeah, it's month.
Although it's not national. It's
international. It's international now. I think it started with the goal of being national, but then it went beyond that and became international.
Oh yeah, it's so big. I started doing it when I was living in the Caribbean, so yeah. I don't think I've ever done it in the U.S. actually, so it's a big thing though.
Yeah. So during NaNoWriMo, which traditionally is November, so it's coming up, but it must have been 2 years ago now, I think. We did some. Yeah. We did some episodes with some other writers, and you and another friend of ours, Sam, was some of our guest stars on that. So yeah, Fiction Hack, check that out. Let's move on because we've got a few more questions, I think. AJ says he could listen to you talk for days without getting bored, Tony. And I agree, I could too. Did we skip over some questions? I think
Bao had the question. The kitchen we cook in. Is this a noun and complement, or is it a changed order of a declarative sentence? And so this is a relative clause. You can tell that it's a clause because it has that main verb kind of thing going on in it. We cook, right? That could be a sentence by itself. We cook. Therefore, it has to be part of a clause. The trick here, now we've talked in the past about how in English a lot of times something is there but it's dropped out, like the letters in a contraction or the do in a simple tense verb. What's dropped out here is that. The kitchen that we cook in. Mm-hmm. That is a clear indicator that you've got a relative clause kind of going on, or this guy that I know, right?
And you can just say this guy I know.
Exactly. Yeah. You can almost always drop out of that, and that makes English really, really fluid. You don't need all of these connecting words sometimes, but it can make it a little bit of a challenge. So that we cook in is a relative clause that's describing the kitchen. Like, which kitchen is it? it's the kitchen that we cook in, right?
Yeah. 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 So you're specifying so that sentence is you're specifying if you have a house with two kitchens and you don't use one of them, then that you'd use that sentence. Okay.
Yeah.
Then there's the Batman question. We've done that.
Good question, Bao Bao. So Tet has the question. Hello, sir. Welcome to the live stream. I'm from Myanmar. Oh yeah. Please, sir, is it important to learn phonetics first when we are starting to learn English?
The short answer is no, definitely not. Not when you start learning English. That would definitely be something that comes in later. Would you agree?
Yeah, I mean, I guess it really depends, but yes. So one thing that's important to realize is that phonics is taught to children at very low grade levels or even age levels, preschool, kindergarten, first couple of grades. But by the time you're in kindergarten, you've already been speaking English for 4 or 5 years, maybe, right? So it's important to realize that phonics is not usually the first step in learning the language. Usually you learn how the language kind of works, then you're taught phonics as a native speaker. As a child, you learn how the language works, then later you're taught phonics. Mm-hmm. But it is actually not uncommon for parents nowadays to read phonics books to their children and teach their children phonics from the very beginning. So it's not necessarily
I do think it's important because I know a lot of people who there are certain sounds that they don't say properly, and especially the sound. There's a lot of people, native speakers, lived in the UK their whole life. They don't say "I think," they say "I think," and to me it sounds. I heard an American saying. I think it was Jennifer Lawrence, actually, the actress. She was saying, "Oh, I love the way that British people do that," and I don't. I hate it. It's only some British people that do that, and I don't like the way. I think it makes people sound like they're lacking brain cells. But
it does kind of sound like you're drunk.
It's like a slurring.
I didn't really think of it that way.
Yeah.
So one of the things.
But I think that because of that, that's why now they do teach phonics more to children than when I was a kid. But yeah, go on.
So also that I have mixed feelings about this because one of the reasons that phonics exists, so in other languages than English, in most of these languages, you can go back to a time where there were many different languages spoken in the same country. So like there were like 6 different kinds of French. There were like 30 different kinds of Chinese. And the government comes in and they say, this is the correct form. Everyone has to be taught this form and no one's allowed to speak any other forms of this language. And this has never really happened in English. And so we have very wildly different accents and, patterns of speech in different parts of the English-speaking world, partially because the English-speaking world is lots of different countries. So you have to realize that sometimes the difference in the way people pronounce words isn't wrong, that's their accent. There are certain accents that we think of as being wrong, and that's true to an extent, but it's also important to realize that those are just kind of accents.
Yeah.
So we talk a lot, to go back to the question, I just wanted to explain that about accents. We talk a lot on English Language Club about tools. Grammar is a tool, phonics is a tool, and phonetics is a tool. So for some people, this is going to be really helpful. Some people might want to start with this. If you look at the English alphabet, let's say you're coming from Cyrillic or Arabic alphabet, or a language without an alphabet, like Chinese, that's just that doesn't have phonetics the same way, then you might really benefit from starting off really digging into the pronunciation of the sounds and the phonics of how the different sounds combine. And that if that works for you, that might be really helpful, and it'll help you pronounce words and understand words the whole time you're going along. If it's not helping you, it may not be worth it, or it might be
Yeah.
something you might want to revisit later on.
Yes. So the important point here is that phonetics is a tool. Phonetics is
Yes.
a tool for improving your pronunciation. But not, but everyone's brains work in different ways. Everyone's coming from a different place, depending on what your first language is, and all sorts of things. So you can't. It's difficult. I can't answer this question really, but it depends on you. If you find it helpful,
Yes.
then great. But yeah, is it important to learn phonetic when first learning? When I said no, I mean what I meant is you don't need to study it at all to speak well. You need to,
Yes.
because you might be the kind of person, maybe your brain works in a kind of way where you're just good at absorbing this kind of thing more in a more natural way.
Mhm.
So if you think we talked about the way that we teach phonetics to children, but
Mhm.
really children aren't, from the child's point of view, they're not studying phonetics. They're sort of, because children just learn by absorbing,
Right.
so we know what we're
Well,
doing.
I mean, once you get into like kindergarten stuff, they are. But when you're working with them when they're even younger,
Yeah.
so another like that, it also really depends. So, for instance, if I'm learning a language, when I first learned Spanish, for instance, I did not start with phonetics or pronunciation. It was just kind of something you worked with as you learned. But when
Mm.
I learn, for instance, one of the ancient languages that I've studied, that has a completely different alphabet or just wildly different. It's very different from English. It doesn't use the Latin basic pronunciations. Then I have sometimes started with pronunciation and phonetics
Mm.
and spent a lot of time really learning how, for instance, I mean, when I was studying Russian, I never really learned Russian, but I spent a lot of time on pronouncing the Cyrillic alphabet, and this was years and years ago, but I got pretty good at it.
Yeah.
But I never, but that was the only thing I did. I never wound up actually learning much Russian grammar or vocabulary. So sometimes it can be useful. Sometimes it can just kind of get in your way.
Yeah.
I should say, I was like
What I think
14.
people learning English should do is, or, you know, and not just English, any language. Like when I learned Spanish, phonetics sort of comes in when there are sounds that I find difficult to produce that are used a lot in Spanish, or and the same thing may be true of people learning English. That's when you can sort of dip into phonetics to sort of think about how do I produce that sound, and then so you just use it to sort of fill that gap, but you don't need to know the whole subject, and the whole subject of phonetics is huge and goes way beyond me. But I've at the English Language Club, we've tried to sort of produce enough material for people to dip into all of the different sounds, especially the ones that might be a problem. So, and that's how I think it should be used as by people learning English as a second language, if that is their main goal. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, Sophia's got a question here. It says, can you talk about the future perfect tense? Well, did we talk about that earlier? We talked
We
about
talked about the past perfect.
Yeah, we talked about past perfect. So yeah, we've done a lot of perfect tenses today. That's great.
Yes. So it's actually very similar to the way the past perfect is used. Again, it's a perfect. So you're talking by using the perfect. You're talking about the thing that is completed up till then. It doesn't necessarily mean that it's not going to keep going.
So hang on, let's
means
just clarify, because in these live streams, a lot of people come and go. They may not have seen what we were saying earlier on. So basically, a perfect tense. When a tense is perfect, you're talking about something that's finished at the time of action, which is the time you're talking about. So in the future perfect, you're talking about something that is finished in the future, or will be finished in the future.
Yes.
So,
So I will have lived here for 6 years next year,
yeah.
right? Or
in half an hour,
we will,
or sooner, this live stream will have finished.
yes, we will have been doing the live stream for however many months.
Yeah.
So like you're talking about some time in the future, and you're saying at this time in the future, this action will be finished, or at least the part of it I'm talking about will be finished. And like the past tenses, it's most often used with like in combination with other future tenses. Though it's important to note that we often use the present tenses to talk about the future, but still, you'll be talking about the future, and then you'll have a use the perfect to show something.
Got some technical issues. I'm not sure if we are live. I think we may have lost signal just then, but I think we've gone back now. Okay. Yeah, let us know if you can hear us. I think we're back now. Give us a thumbs up if you can hear us. We will be finishing soon anyway, but let's see if we've got any other questions that we can use. AJ's asking me what headphones I'm using. They are called... what are they called? They're called Tozo. The brand is called Tozo. They're Tozo T10s. I got them on Amazon. Yeah. Let's see. Any other questions about English?
So, Bao asked, what kind of feeling do negative questions express?
So, a negative question.
And
let's start with an example of a negative question. Why don't we?
Well, I think there's two different. Yes. Yeah. They're like, like why don't we go to a movie? Although you might ask, you don't want to go to a movie, do you?
Yeah. I think that's more of the negative, because that's like the negative structure. You don't want to.
Yes.
But then it's not the question structure. So the question, making a question negative would be, am I not being... Are you not listening to me?
Reasonable.
Yeah.
Am I not being reasonable?
Yeah.
Are you not entertained?
Yeah. Exactly.
So if you were talking, and I think there's many different forms. Another one would be you have you have a Tesla, don't you? Or something like this, right? And there's lots of different forms of the negative questions. If you're specifically talking about the one with the negative question structure, like it's just not. It's not.
The
as
question
common.
Is, what kind of feeling do they express?
Yeah. So, Balbo, do you have a specific? Are you referring to the negative question structure? There's different types there's lots of different types of questions happy?
And lots of different types of negative question.
Because I wouldn't say that's generally what is being referred to when they say a negative question. A negative question would be something like, you don't want to go to a movie, do you?
But I don't think so. I think that's a question tag. That's what's called a question tag. I would say a negative question is when you're using the question form. So you're starting with the auxiliary verb, but then you're making it negative because you're also using the word not.
Right. No, I don't think... I see what you're saying. I understand what you're saying. I just don't think that's what people are usually referring to. It'd be more like in French, where you say something like n'est-ce pas, or a beautiful day, no. And so those kinds of things are not... They don't necessarily have a specific different feeling. They're just a little bit more... They're a little bit more poetic. They're a little bit more... But they don't... for instance, always represent sarcasm, whereas at least the examples we were using before of actually using the negative question structure were sarcastic. Like, are you not entertained? It's not so much that you're asking them as you're asking them to think about it themselves.
So it's rhetorical. It's not really sarcastic. It's rhetorical, but it also
both.
Yeah, or you could also you're trying to be like showman and grand.
Yes.
So I think that's the kind of thing that Balbal's getting at in this question. Yeah.
So was that our last question? Tet thanked us for our answer about phonetics.
Okay, yeah, I think that's it. That's a good place to leave it today. Now, last week we said we are going to be bringing these regular live streams to an end soon. And that's true. So next week is going to be the last week that we're definitely going to be doing it. But that's not to say that we're stopping them. We will do them again occasionally. And in fact, we might do one the following week. That might be the sort of launch of Inside English if we've got it ready by then, which I hope we will. So yeah, there's definitely still going to be live streams, and I think what we'll probably do is, if we're both able to do this slot, then we'll do it. The problem is, it's just over the next couple of months I'm going to be busy with some other things, so I can't commit to doing it every week. That's the only reason, but that's not to say that we won't do it. So don't worry, we're not going anywhere. We're still going to be here. So make sure you're subscribed and hit the bell icon. And let's see, how many likes have we got? We didn't get many likes. We've only got 15, but we've got 22 people watching. So if you are watching, give us a thumbs up if you've enjoyed the show so far. Well, if you've enjoyed the show, because we're just about to finish. And yeah, stay in touch. Join the mailing list. If you go to the website, you can see where you can join the mailing list. I don't send much email. I literally haven't sent anything for over a year, probably maybe 2 years. But we will use that mailing list to inform people about Inside English when it's coming out, and when we sort of get going on a more regular structure again in the new year. So yeah, so make sure you do that, and thank you for watching, and we will see you next week. Bye bye.